Welcome back to What the Flick. I'm Matt, that's Christy, that's Alonso. 50 years ago this week, the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey hit theaters on April 2nd. Exactly. If you haven't seen it, we are doing the weird chorus at the kind of space travel scene towards the end. Iconic movie, groundbreaking, very influential, somewhat mixed reception at the time. Pauline Kael famously hated it, thought it was terrible.
I believe she's the one who called it a Shaggy God movie.
Yeah, Kubrick collaborated with Arthur C. Clarke on the film based on a short story written called The Sentinel. Also had kind of gotten some collaboration and some feedback from Carl Sagan about our perception of alien life. It's a fascinating movie to watch. If you've never had the chance to see it on a big screen, it's worth seeing.
Oh, God.
But it's 50 years and arguably some very prophetic things in the movie, some things that aren't so prophetic. There's a terrible sequel that came out.
It's not terrible.
Yeah, but it's not great. It's not great, but there's recently some behind-the-scenes pictures that have been shared and available online that I think we have some that we can show. And yeah, so there's some behind-the-scenes photos. This is a fascinating movie, though. When's the last time you guys, either of you, watched this?
It's been a while, but it might be my favorite Kubrick, like this, and maybe also The Shining.
Doctor Strangelove for me, but I do love this movie. I mean, this is one of those films that changed movies, you know. Right. And I saw it a few years ago at the Egyptian. I took a friend of mine who had never seen it just so we could watch it in 70. Because if you can see it in 70, see it in 70. You can look for this on YouTube because that night some guy who was on acid or something freaked out during the Stargate sequence. They had to stop the movie, remove him from the theater, and like go back and show it again.
Don't take drugs before this movie.
This movie is drugs. You don't. It's redundant. No, I think what's interesting when you look back at the movie, like there was I remember I think one of the Harlan Ellison essays was talking about when the movie was new and people were sort of arguing about it. You could have a film in 1968, a major studio blockbuster from a big name director in the science fiction genre that left people confused and wanting to discuss it and having differing interpretations. Compare that to 50 years later when test audiences for Annihilation found it too intelligent and Paramount basically buries it and then dumps it on Netflix in most of the world.
And what's interesting about that time, because then you look at the other movies that come out, especially in the early 70s from that new Hollywood crop of directors. In America, we're years into Vietnam. We're out, we've been living with the Cold War for years, and there's this sense of dread and almost nihilism. They're nihilists, Donnie. And you have not just this movie, but you have a bunch of movies that have, if not outright bummer endings, at best these kind of
hopeless,
like, what does it all mean?
It's the system. What are you going to do?
Right. I mean, you get a bit of that. I think a few years later with Silent Running, right? A similar thing, right?
And also the French New Wave happened. Like there were a lot of people who were sort of changing the language of how movies worked and how editing worked and all that stuff. So yeah, things were, it was sort of fecund ground to be experimental and to have a narrative like this that is not immediately linear. I mean, it is a movie that makes sense once you sort of figure out what it's doing, but it doesn't, show you all its goodies on the first go.
But you can walk away from it with a myriad interpretations and maybe be wrong or be right or who knows, and that's kind of exciting about it. And one thing I'm always struck by with 2001 and with Kubrick in general is like the precision that results on screen seems cool and seems effortless, but when you know about Kubrick and how he would make people do like walk through a door 100 times or whatever, what you see is just like it's so streamlined and so just deceptively simple and yet totally profound. And then the iconography in this film, I mean, from thus spake Zarathustra, which I'm saying wrong, I'm sorry, but you can hear this first few notes and be back there immediately. You see a bone get thrown in the air. You see the monolith.
That's one of the greatest jump cuts of all time.
Yeah, that get parodied. The Simpsons. I mean, name it a million ways. You know what it is immediately.
The reason John Landis had the line "See you next Wednesday" in almost all of his movies is because somebody says it in this film.
Yeah, there's a recent article about how Kubrick was working on the effects that they were using for the Stargate sequence, and it involved like these really really kind of dangerous chemicals that he's pouring on stuff and filming at a higher frame rate, and he's in there, and his wife talks about how he comes home when his his nose is running, and he spent like weeks or months, breathing all these toxic chemicals just to get this effect. And to your point, Christy, like that's an example of how much he was working. Even at the risk to his own health, probably, to get this done.
This movie is so good that it convinced people that he faked the moon landing.
Right, right. Now, I think we have some behind-the-scenes photos that we can show you, I think. Yeah, so this is, right, so that's Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke on the set of, I think that's the shuttle that takes them to the moon base.
Where the stewardess does the 360.
Right, so that's some design stuff for the Discovery. Let's see what else we have here. The video phone. The video phone, which we now walk around with phones in our pockets that can do so much more than that. That's the inside of the Discovery, kind of the carousel that Bowman can run around in and maintain some level of bone density. That's the mine on the moon, right? That's the shot where they've recreated the moon. So obviously they then used that set for the moon landing a few months later. That's the
finale.
The finale. I always figured that this is partially Bowman in a zoo, like basically.
Yeah, I always think of like Billy Pilgrim on Tralfamadore. In Slaughterhouse 5.
Yeah.
There's a really amazing exhibit. Did you go to the Kubrick exhibit at LACMA?
I did, yeah.
That was really cool, and just to see all that kind of stuff, and just the
miniatures,
the obsession he had with just minutia, and the notes and the side of the screenplay, and so fun to see all that.
One thing it did not predict though is that we no longer have Howard Johnsons.
Oh.
Right. Well, at the moment.
That's
maybe
true.
It'll come
they
back.
could come back.
But you know what though? You look at a movie like Tree of Life, right? Like the Cosmos section in Tree of Life, and Malick is a singular filmmaker himself, but it's hard to look at that and not think of 2001. A lot of movies I think are like that, where it's just it's a change the language is a good way to put it.
Yeah, we were talking about comedies that earlier in the show, about comedies that affect us. Like I fairly often, at least in the 80s, would say, "I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that." I mean, God forbid you were named Dave, because anytime you ask somebody to do something, "Sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that."
Right, and in Moon, a movie I love, Moon. Like, how do you not think of Hal when Kevin Spacey's doing the voice of the computer, and it's a totally different kind of character. Still, it harkens back to that. So.
Yeah, fascinating movie. I remember catching it at the Cinerama Dome.
Oh, cool.
When they had they were showing it at the Dome in, I don't know, like late 80s at one point. I hadn't been here for very long, and it was, well, I better go see that because it's on the big screen. But it is, to our eyes, as we're used to movies like moving so fast, like it's languid would be putting it generously, like it takes its time.
It's sort of like just suspended, isn't it? It just sort of hovers and is suspended. You gotta sort of go with it, float with it.
Yeah, it takes its time.
If you're up for it.
Yeah, if you're up for it, yeah. Then there's it's always, there's that great scene at the beginning of History of the World Part 1 when they're making fun of it too.
Oh, right.
Right.
But I'm very excited that it's getting a reissue. There's some Cinerama 70 print apparently that they found that's going to be making its way around. Because if you can see 2001 in a theater on the biggest screen possible, you should do that.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth seeing. And you see, I mean, look, like the models and the miniatures and that help create what we get in Star Wars. So that's it for this week. We're going to be, today, we're going to come back tomorrow. We'll have some reviews of the new movies in theaters. So make sure to join us for that.